All right, so let's make foolishness explicit. So the essence of foolishness is, of course, poor judgment and lack of discernment. You know these kinds of people, you probably have some of these friends in your life. The kind of friends that just have constantly bad judgment. They constantly keep getting themselves into bad situations in their own life that they themselves created through how they make choices in their life. They're making the wrong kinds of choices over and over and over again. And they're not learning their lessons from this. They keep doubling down on their mistakes. That's a fool. That's the essence of a fool. A fool has a poor sense of priorities in life. So the fool has life backwards, has his priorities backwards. The fool places the low above the high. What do I mean by this? Well, I mean something like, rather than pursuing the truth, which would be the high above the low in this case might be something like sex or drugs or pleasure or money, right? See, the wise will place the truth above all those things, whereas the fool will place sex above truth, money above truth, fame and reputation above truth, drugs above truth. And truth is not the only high priority. There are many other high priorities we could talk about. That's just one example. But this tends to be the fool's problem. He places the low above the high, and he's living his life backwards. And of course, because of this, all sorts of craziness and calamity ensues and lots of suffering. And the fool doesn't know, why am I so unlucky? Why do I keep stumbling in all these problems? Well, because you've placed the low above the high. Because the fool can't see the value of the high. The fool can't see the value of truth, of love, of beauty, of existential questioning, of contemplation, and of philosophy. To the fool, none of these things mean anything, because the fool is only interested in base survival cravings, satisfying things like sex, cravings for food and for money and for fame and for status and for material possessions and things like this. The fool is also easily lost in minutia and pettiness because the fool is wrapped up in survival. The fool has confused life for the game of survival, and he's just like a hamster in a wheel, running, but always in place, never getting anywhere. It takes wisdom to see that hamster in a wheel mechanism. So the fool often loses sight of the big picture of life and just gets so engrossed and mesmerized by the minutia of life that he could spend 40 years, doing some petty, stupid little thing, thinking it's important, when really, in the grand scheme of things, it's not important. Because again, his sense of importance and significance and priority, this is all backwards because he's not thinking existentially or deeply about life. The fool is ignorant and proud of it. The biggest fools are aggressively ignorant. They will try to fight you over their ignorance to prove to you how smart they are. And the more ignorant they are, the harder they fight. Because the fool is unwilling to admit a mistake or to admit that they're wrong about a thing. The fool thinks he understands everything. One of the key characteristics of fools is arrogance. The fool thinks he's smarter than everybody else. The fool thinks he's got reality all figured out and that everybody else is an idiot. The fool underestimates the depth of problems in life. Life has existential dilemmas that the fool is completely oblivious to. Because the fool is wrapped up in his little reality, his little selfish, petty little existence. And the fool doesn't see anything beyond himself, outside of himself. He doesn't have a universal sort of perspective, a meta perspective. The fool is completely wrapped up in the in the content, the little petty content of his, survival problems in life. And he can't see anything beyond that. And then, of course, that leads to a sort of a vicious downward cycle of, just engaging in the pettiness and minutia of survival. And the more you do that, the more you suffer, and then the more problems you have, and then it just doubles down upon itself. The fool tends to be anti-intellectual, doesn't value education. Because, hey, he thinks he already knows everything there is to know. So why read books? Why listen to experts? Why bother to go out there and find wise elders and sages to study with? Why do all that when I already know everything? Of course, the fool doesn't contemplate or self-reflect. This is key for the fool. It's impossible to be a fool if you self-reflect a lot. Because the more you self-reflect, the more you see how you act like a fool, the more you see the consequences and the suffering that this foolishness creates in your life, and then it turns into a sort of self-correcting mechanism. Self-reflection does. But the fool is too busy. He's too distracted by the externalities of life, chasing pleasure and other external things. Doesn't leave any time to sit, to reflect, to contemplate, to deeply think things through, to ask questions. The fool just wants answers. The fool isn't willing to do the actual intellectual work to derive his own answers by asking deep questions. The fool thinks that, hey, if you can just tell me the answers, that'll just be a shortcut. And that is, in general, the fool's folly, is that he's looking for shortcuts in life. Everything, how can I make it easy? How can I make it comfortable? How can I make it most convenient? And in doing that, the fool thinks that by trying to have the easy life, his life will be easy, but counterintuitively, the opposite happens. When you try to go for the easy life, your life becomes hard. Whereas if you just embraced the difficulty and challenge of life, faced emotional labor head on, didn't avoid responsibility, then your life would actually start to become easier. The fool doesn't see value in truth. The fool confuses truth with whatever serves him. Because the way the fool thinks, if it doesn't serve me, like if the truth, what is the truth going to do for me? If the truth doesn't give me pleasure, and it doesn't get me money and sex, and it doesn't make me comfortable, and oftentimes truth is uncomfortable. If the truth doesn't make me comfortable, it doesn't make me feel good immediately, then what's the use of truth? Or the fool confuses his personal biases and beliefs and dogmas and ideology for the truth. Like the 10 Commandments, that's the truth. Whatever reinforces my existing worldview, that's the truth. That's a very foolish epistemic mistake. Of course, the fool is generally unconcerned with existential questions, feels that they're just philosophy, just mental masturbation, doesn't see the utility in existential questioning. Generally speaking, the fool lacks awareness, lacks consciousness. That should be obvious, given how much we've talked about consciousness on this channel. The fool is oblivious to the problem of self-deception. The fool externalizes deception as something that is coming from the outside. So oftentimes that's why the fool falls for things like conspiracy theories, because it's very tempting to think that somebody else is fooling you, when in fact, the foolishness is coming from within you. But because the fool doesn't self-reflect and doesn't study one's own self-deceptions, the fool is ignorant of such things. And therefore, the fool has many enemies and people that he judges and hates and blames and scapegoats outside, externally.